Cool. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. We'll see if we get a few more people trickling in over the next few minutes, but welcome to the seminar tonight. Thank you all for coming. I want to start by saying just a little bit about WoAA in case you are new and maybe don't know about it yet. But my name is Annika and I'm the Professional Development Chair of WoAA, that is the Women of Aeronautics and Astronautics, and we are an international organization that aims to promote gender minorities in space. And we do that through a variety of different programming, including technical development, professional development, mentorship, outreach, and putting on a lot of events like this. And tonight I want to give a warm welcome to our guest, Nita Singh Kaushal. She is the founder of Miss CEO, a company that empowers students and women with world-class leadership training, mentorship, and career exploration opportunities. Since its founding in 2011, Miss CEO has trained over 30,000 children, young women, and professionals all over the world. Nita is currently a lecturer of the School of Engineering at Stanford University and an instructor at Stanford Continuing Studies, where she teaches undergraduate and graduate students, as well as professional women, how to develop leadership skills so they can make meaningful contributions to their careers. Nita also proudly serves on the Girls at the Tech Leadership Council. Prior to Miss CEO, Nita held senior product management roles at Yahoo and Intel, served on the Stanford Women's Community Center Advisory Board, as well as led Yahoo Women in Tech, a 500+ member organization committed to attracting, developing, and retaining more women in technical and executive positions. Nita graduated from the Stanford University with a degree in electrical engineering. And so welcome, Nita. I'll turn over the floor to you, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for that warm welcome. It's so wonderful to be here with all of you. And I just love that this is a topic that you want to learn more about, because I think that when it comes to negotiation and advocating for yourself, nobody really teaches you that in the classroom. And I think that we could benefit from learning that skill set because it can have a huge impact in terms of our goals as well as our careers. I'm going to share some slides right now, but I want to just remind everyone, I want this to be as interactive as it can be. So I know many of you came to this talk with specific questions in mind. So I will have lots of opportunities for you to ask those questions throughout, or if you just want to take it all in and ask at the end, please do. But I really wanted to kind of answer some of your more pressing questions on this subject. So as you heard in the introduction, I've been teaching leadership and I've been really kind of passionate about empowering women specifically with leadership skills, largely influenced because of my own journey. So as you heard, I majored in electrical engineering, and I was born and raised here in the Bay Area in California. So I think the high tech surroundings definitely had an impact on me, and I was really into math and science, like many of you here. Did electrical engineering, and pretty early on in that major, realized that what I was experiencing in high school in terms of women doing really well in math and science classes and being somewhat top of the class, all of a sudden I'm asking, wait, where do they all go, right? I was like a handful of women in the EE major, not many role models for me to kind of connect with or identify with. And I was really kind of just focused on, I would say, just the step in front of me. Like, let me just kind of get through this quarter. Let me try to get through this problem set. Let me try to get an internship. Let me get my first job. And I wasn't really thinking about the big picture, about the career that I wanted to have, and how was I going to go about getting that. In fact, I recall when I did get my first job in the mobile engineering lab at Intel, I recall a few things. One, when I got the opportunity, and this was kind of at the end of my undergrad, and I was just ready to get out. I'm like, you know what? Once I get a paycheck and I get my first job, I'm going to be all set. That was sort of my goal. Got that lined up, and I said yes right away. So I didn't even negotiate my first paycheck. It was all about just getting out, getting a steady job, being comfortable. So I kind of lost a little bit of power in that first transaction. And then when I got there, I realized that there was just so many skills at play that I had never learned. For example, I didn't know exactly how to effectively communicate the work and the results that I was achieving, or how do I connect with the right mentors or sponsors or the strategic projects. And there just seemed to be this whole skill set that nobody taught me, but the ones that were accelerating the fastest in their careers seemed to have mastered. And that was a skill set that you couldn't ignore, no matter how smart you were or how many academic accomplishments you had. So I became really interested in I'm going to show you something, in learning these skills, and then also teaching women in particular how to be well versed in this important leadership toolkit. And before I go into that, I just had to plug this because my sons, I have 3 sons, ages 9, 7, and 3, and they wouldn't let me do this talk to this special audience without showing you, of course, the Saturn V Lego that they built. They've been obsessed with everything space and aviation for as long as, since they were 1. And so this is probably 90% of the reason why I'm like, yes, I will speak to this audience so I can make my little boys proud of what mommy's doing right now. So back to the skills. I feel like it's really important to learn these skills, and I applaud you and I commend you for being a part of organizations that emphasize the significance of learning these leadership skills. And this is, I've developed 3 courses at Stanford teaching undergrads, grad students, and professional women how to build this leadership toolkit. I also started a company called Miss CEO, which empowers young women in middle school and high school and college with these skills so that they can kind of help them navigate important decision points in their lives. And as important as all these skills are, I would say that the skill that I'm the most excited to talk about and teach has to do with advocating for yourself, has to do with negotiation. I think that oftentimes when we think about negotiation, we think, oh, this is about money, this is about my salary, but it's so much more. It is, and it's largely related, it's interrelated with a lot of the skills that you see here, whether how you communicate with others, how you manage your time, how you bounce back from failure, how you connect with others. So I'm hoping that you'll see some of the connections here in today's workshop, as well as learn some helpful tips as you think about the options and opportunities that you have in the next few years. So in this hour or so talk, I thought I would touch upon some areas that I think are extremely important in terms of laying the foundation of how do you negotiate well. I want to talk about mindset, the research that you need to do, how do you position your ask so that it's effective and compelling. And then I also want to show you some examples of how you string that all together so it comes off confident and people understand what it is you're asking, and you're able to actually build alliances in the process and get what it is you want. So let's start with mindset. I don't think we can ignore this when we think about advocating for more and asking for more. If you don't mind, in the chat window, let's say on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the most comfortable with negotiation and 1 being the least, where would you rank yourself? If you want to call it out, you can too, but I'll look at the chat window right now. Okay, we got some 1s, some 2s. Got a 5, Amy. I like that. Imposter syndrome. I hear you, Samantha. Okay. So I completely resonate with this. So we have a lot of the lower numbers. So a lot of us aren't necessarily feeling as confident as we should when it comes to negotiation. And I don't blame you at all. I think that this is a skill that we don't have that many good examples when we think about people negotiating effectively. In fact, what comes to mind when you think about negotiations, at least what you see on like your favorite TV drama, are these highly emotional situations, and it's very contentious, and it just seems to backfire. And especially when you think about women asking for more, demanding more, it seems to rub people the wrong way. So I can understand the discomfort. Do you mind sharing, and feel free to say it out loud if you can, or if you want to chat, sharing what about negotiation makes you uncomfortable when you think about it, or if you've tried it, or you didn't try it. You just didn't try when something was offered to you.
I think for me, it depends on kind of what I'm negotiating. So if I'm advocating for myself, I'm less likely to make a scene or a confrontation because I just really dislike confrontation. But if I'm like negotiating for something I believe in or some like other third party thing, then I feel like I would go a little bit harder, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think too, when I just looking at the women that I've taught over the years, women are we're very good at negotiating for other people. We have no problem advocating for other people. But when it comes to ourselves, we struggle quite a bit. I'm looking at the chat. Julie says appearing entitled or asking for too much. Karen doesn't have the experience. I agree with that. Not knowing what's reasonable to negotiate, not having the data. When it's in person, you feel like you're gonna like, how do you respond and not be awkward? Yes, you've come to the right talk. I'm really happy to see that we are on the same page in terms of the things that we are concerned about. And how you responded to this question is honestly how all of my students have responded over the last 10 years of me teaching this subject. So let me go over some of the more popular responses that I've encountered. Um, it's interesting. I have to bring up privilege. And what I mean by privilege, especially teaching at universities and at Stanford, where students are coming out usually with really great job offers at very lucrative companies. And they feel like, wow, this is more than enough, right? Or I'm very lucky that I even have a job in this market, or it's much more than my parents ever made. So they start to talk themselves out of even considering a negotiation based on that logic. And then I saw some of you responded just in terms of questioning your worth, whether it's related to your imposter syndrome. And it could be because you're inexperienced, you're young, maybe you don't have any other options. This is your only offer, and you definitely don't want to mess it up. Meritocracy. I don't know if this resonates with you, but this was definitely something that I experienced. So I really wanted to believe, even when I took my first job offer at Intel, I said, it's okay that I didn't negotiate. I'm just going to work really hard and show everyone how awesome I am. And it will just kind of self-correct, right? I'll get rewarded in the next performance review. I'll catch up, right? Unfortunately, that never happens. So, and I'll show you some data there. Some of you are probably concerned about the potential harm it can cause to a relationship. You'll be perceived as ungrateful or too greedy. In fact, you might get punished for even asking. And then the last one, just so that this is a more comprehensive list, is this thing that I like to call just enough negotiation. And what this looks like is not doing the research and preparation going into a negotiation, but you need to do it. So you kind of make some sort of feeble ask and you get a little bit thrown in there, nothing of consequence, mind you, nothing like really impacts your compensation. Maybe it's like an extra day of vacation or something very, very small. And you just feel like, oh, good, I did it, check, I got something. And so we kind of sort of trick ourselves into thinking that we did enough. Did I miss anything? Does this sound about right when you think about some of the reasons that may make you hesitate when you think about this conversation? Okay. So here we are. We have all these things in our way mentally that prevent us from thinking about having this conversation, preparing for this conversation effectively. And I am here to remind you and to tell you that we really have an obligation to address this because things are not changing. And by things, I mean, there's a lot of data points in society. And unfortunately, I've been lecturing and teaching negotiation for 10 years, and these data points have not changed, right? On average, women are making 80 cents for every dollar a man earns. We see that the more education a woman has, the greater disparity in her wages. We are earning less than men in 99% of all occupations. And you would think even like the female dominated occupations like nursing or teaching, you still see the men in those fields making more. And there's huge socioeconomic impact to all of this. Not only are we working harder than ever before, and we're doing much more, and we're adding so much value, but a lot of us are becoming the primary breadwinners for our families. And it's just simply, this is just not a fair situation for us. And it's very demoralizing to know that you're doing the same amount of work for less. I also want to go to some other data points in that these mental roadblocks, there's a lot of things that are happening as a result of that. First of all, when you look at the data, men negotiate 4 times as frequently compared to women. Because of these mental roadblocks and our attitude, like we liken going to a negotiation like going to the dentist. It's as fun, like we have to do it. Whereas men would say that it's like playing a ball game. It's something that's competitive and fun, and it's something that you can kind of get, it's like a sport. Our expectations are off. So like I said, a lot of us, when we get a job offer, if you were like me, it was a hooray, somebody wants me, hallelujah, versus actually kind of, okay, well, I'm grateful for this, but we need to look at the numbers. And the impact is huge. You all know compounding, and I'm sure you all know how that works. And maybe you've seen charts where even if you leave $1,000 or $5,000, and you don't negotiate that in the beginning of your career, how that compounds over time. So yes, there's a huge financial consequences for not negotiating. But the other part of this that people don't necessarily talk too much about is people start to treat you differently and think of you differently if they feel like you do not advocate, if you do not stand up for what's right, if you aren't able to not even advocate for your career, but just even how you manage your projects and your teams and the people around you. The leadership perception quickly declines if you're not able to have to master this skill set. So it's really important for a lot of areas of your career. And to the point of being punished, I think that there's a few things that we need to think about. First of all, those data points are to show you that we need to stop being afraid for a few reasons. Our salaries are quite durable over time. So this whole idea of meritocracy doesn't quite work in the real world. You really need to take ownership of your work and your results and advocate as you need to and broadcast broadly to all the stakeholders so they recognize your value. The salary that you do take home impacts all your other financial rewards to some extent. It's always some sort of percentage, which determines the bonuses, retirement, raises. Raises, quite frankly, are harder to come by. So it's really important to go in on the right footing in any opportunity. And as exciting as that offer could be when you get something from a company or an organization, I will tell you this: the initial excitement of the job will wear off quickly if you feel that you are not being recognized or rewarded the way that you should. I have a quick story here. So when I was working as a product manager at Yahoo years ago, I remember having a conversation with my manager at the time where I asked for a raise or a promotion, and he made it very clear. He said, this is the pay structure. This is how everybody in your position, this is what everyone in your position is making. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's reassuring, right? That's what we hope. We hope that that it's transparent. Everyone's at this level is making this much. Everyone at that level is making this much. Makes me feel at ease. One day I get to work. I step out of off the elevator and I'm walking to my desk and I see so many people from my kind of on the floor. They were huddled around the group or the printer that we have kind of, in the center of the desk situation. There's like the group printer, and they're huddled there and they're looking at the printer and they look kind of like depressed and just kind of quiet. And I'm like, what happened? And I saw that our manager had accidentally printed everybody's salaries because I think he was doing some sort of performance review exercise and he was kind of calculating things, and I guess he forgot to pick it up. Well, that was probably one of the most depressing days because not only did we see that the pay structure was not normalized. It was not consistent. People were making all sorts of different like range. There was all sorts of different ranges in there. People who are more experienced were making less than younger people. People who were the star players were making less than people who were just there for a long time. It just made no sense. And that's when it was very clear to me that I had an obligation to ask for more, and I had to take ownership of it, and nobody else was going to look out for me except for me. So this is something that I want you to understand. Even when people have the best of intentions, you still need to look out for yourself. And I want you to think about this too. Have you ever heard of a situation where anyone has gotten the job retracted or taken away for asking for more? I would love to, if you do have a situation, I would love to hear it. I bring this up because I'm sure that it has happened. For the most part, it doesn't, for just simply asking for more or having a conversation around the terms, or asking, saying I have a counter, and I'll go over some examples. But for the most part, I've not heard anyone get punished. I have heard of a breakdown in conversation if it comes off in the wrong tone, or if it's presented in a very rude way. And I would say in those situations, the person is not being punished for asking for more. The person is being punished because the other party doesn't want to work with someone like that. So it's also about the relationship as well. And there can't be an erosion of trust in the relationship between both parties. So I hope that puts you at ease a little bit. So I think to own and to be aware of what's holding us back is helpful, but to also know that we need to do something because we owe it to ourselves to value the work that we're doing, but also as women who are innovating and leading in all of these amazing fields, it really does start with the actions we take and how we stand up for ourselves. So let's say this mindset, we understand what we're dealing with, and it's not going to change overnight. I'm not trying to say it will, but it does help going into these conversations feeling as prepared as you can. And that's why information gathering is so important. So when I'm thinking about asking for more, it's not just let me speak off the top of my head or make this up as I go along. That's when you lose a lot of power. If you go in there armed with the right data, that will make you feel a lot more confident having this conversation. So how do we get the data? How do we know? How do we do effective research? I always tell my students to start with something called the market value assessment. What the market value assessment is it helps you determine what your market value is based on a variety of factors that I think are very important for all of us to get a sense of and update on a regular basis, since our situation and our circumstances can change. So your market value is determined by your current salary, your years of experience, the market value of your expertise and knowledge, the number of outstanding offers you may have, salary ranges for similar positions, and how substitutable you believe you are. And it's really interesting. I have to say this. When I'm teaching professional women who've been working in industry for 10 plus years, of course, the things that you are going to emphasize or weight will look different than if you are a recent college graduate. So a seasoned professional, I would say, weight your salary, weight your years of experience, emphasize the market value of your expertise. If you're graduating or you're just entering the job market, you're not going to emphasize your $0 current salary. That is not where we're starting from. Where the angle is, and where I think it's even more compelling, is looking at the market value and the potential of the things that you've been studying and the interesting experience you may have had in school. Competitive offers are huge because it speaks to the demand for you, salary ranges for similar positions, and the unique value you can contribute. So it's starting with these data points, but structuring it in a way that's the most compelling. Some of these numbers are really easy to determine. It's pretty obvious, like what my current salary is, for example. But some of these, it's a little nebulous. Like, how do I actually get a very specific range? And I know that a lot of us, it's really easy for us to just Google stuff, right? And Google, we find things like the Glassdoor sites, we find like there's just tons of blogs, LinkedIn, Quora, even people just going into detail about their negotiations and what happened and sharing a lot of this. So you can actually get a lot of information if you're lucky. But for the most part, I would say it's a bit confusing too. Because doesn't this look like familiar to you, right? You're like, oh, this is helpful. There's like $100,000 difference between where am I supposed to start with this? This isn't very helpful. And I understand that. These ranges they don't really paint the best picture. And a lot of it could be outdated, or it's based on geography, or it's just not very specific to your role. So it's not that helpful in terms of your research. So what I think is a better thing to do on top of online is to go to people, to real people, and discuss some of these numbers. And when I mean real people, I know that many of you may not even have these types of contacts yet, or are still trying to figure out how to build your network in a professional setting. Real people could even be like potential recruiters or hiring managers or people you used to work with, and asking them to validate the data the data points that you're uncovering. I know many of us get nervous talking about specific numbers, especially if you have an offer and you're like, should I tell the person what I'm making? Is that right? Is that too much information to talk about? So when you're talking to these real people, good questions, I think that a good way to start out would be, does this range sound right to you? I did a search online, and I found that this range for somebody with my experience and at my level would be making something around here. Does that sound right to you? Or what are the factors that are the most important during the interview and negotiation process that I should be aware of? Who is the final decision maker when we're thinking about negotiating or advocating for more? Like, who holds the power in this conversation? One thing I like to add here, just to kind of give you a little bit more color here, because I know it's really easy for me to say speak to people, and you're like, okay, but what does that mean? I only know 5 people and I don't know who I can trust in that situation. Sometimes it's easier to talk to people that you don't know so well, but can trust them for information. For example, I've had many students be very successful in talking to recruiters that reach out to them on LinkedIn. And especially if it's for a job or position that you're not seriously considering, it's still worth picking up the phone and having a conversation for 5 minutes, just so you can learn a little bit more about what is the market paying for something like this, and add it to your database. That's just a really good thing to do, is keep this database of information updated regularly, so you know how things are changing, what are people looking for, and it just helps you feel more empowered for this type of conversation. I'll pause here. Questions? Okay.
I have a quick question on that last point you made. Could you just elaborate more on what you mean, like what it would look like when you get a message from a recruiter? Maybe it's something that's like outside of your field you're not interested in. Are you
Yeah.
suggesting like kind of carrying out that process to get to a point to get an offer?
No. So it's really interesting. You don't have to necessarily go through an interviewing process to understand what they're looking for. In fact, recruiters seem to be a lot, especially when they're trying to bring in as many people as they can into their pipeline. So usually they're like looking broadly, they reach out to you. I'm sure many of you have encountered recruiters saying, hey, are you interested in this? And for the most part, we probably ignore those requests, especially if it feels too random. But if you think it could be relevant, it could be interesting to say, hey, I would love to learn more about this opportunity. And usually in that first conversation with the recruiter, before they even connect you with the team or the hiring manager, you can learn a little bit about the role. You can learn about what the salary range is, the potential salary range is, and some details like that, which could be helpful for you. You don't have to move the process along beyond that. I'm not here to tell you to waste more time, but I think that it could be helpful to get some useful data points.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? See something.
I actually have a quick question if we have time. I went to a different salary negotiation seminar once in undergrad. I'm a graduate student now. And the presenter, she mentioned at some point, rather than asking for the average salary, you should ask for, I think she said something like 75% of it, with her rationale being that the average includes traditionally marginalized or underpaid groups. If you're interacting with a recruiter to help get that perspective, would you want to factor in something like that too, of, you know, the average is going to be lower because of all these people who have traditionally been underpaid? Or I guess, with your experience, how would you recommend using or not using that advice?
Yeah, I guess I don't frame it as an average. I just ask them what is the salary or what is the range for this role. And to show you what I do, so let's say they give me a range. I don't try to do anything with that other than how do I prove based on my market value assessment, how do I prove that I'm in the highest point of that range? That's my job.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't try to assume anything other than you trying to build the most compelling case I can with my market value assessment.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question in the chat. Amy, do you want to unmute to ask it?
Yeah, I filled out job applications that ask for expected salaries, and I'm afraid that the way I answered was too high, so I didn't get the interview. Do you have any suggestions for a situation like this, how to handle it before it's even a negotiation?
Yeah, well, I'll get to this, and I have some resources and things that I've written on this extensively because it is a very popular question. But to answer your question, I do not recommend presenting the first number, especially when there's no information transparency, right? You don't know what they have, and by establishing the first number in a negotiation, they call it anchoring the conversation around that, right? All of a sudden, you've anchored the conversation. You could leave money on the table by doing so. And in general, I mean, we'll talk about the effective strategy of getting a job. I think we all know that the online job forums there's a lot to be desired through getting a job that way. So I wouldn't necessarily kind of punish yourself thinking, oh, I put it in the wrong number and that's why they're not talking to me, when I think it's more effective to get in the door, but find the decision makers, and then present your case when the time is right. So if it's possible, if you can't avoid the online form, and I know in some cases you can't, if it's possible to write a non-number response, like happy to discuss later, and indicate that you are excited to learn more about the role and to see if it's a fit for both parties before discussing the numbers. But I'm confident the numbers are going to work out. So you're expressing positive expectations there. That's what I recommend. And again, if you're forced to present a number, present the high range. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Good question. All right. And there's a lot of, when we're talking about building a case and thinking about our market value, a lot of times when we think about negotiation too, especially when you're in the interview process with the company, we're so focused on impressing them. We're so focused on trying to get the job that the negotiation is such it's an afterthought. We're like, well, I'll deal with it later, right? I don't even want to think about that right now. Let me just get them to like me and get them to give me an offer. But there are useful data points you can discover if you ask the right questions during the interview, if you pay attention a little bit, if you do some of your own research. So for example, during the interview, or even on your own, if you can get a sense of the employer, like their budget, are they well-funded? Are they looking at a lot of candidates right now? Is this very competitive? How closely do you meet the position requirements, right? Are you like a perfect fit or is it a stretch? The other thing that people miss, because we're so excited about landing the job, is when you are talking to a group and you know how they all take turns interviewing you, and it's a process, right? It's very draining. We get tired. It's like a lot. What I like to pay attention to are the people who are on the level above me, especially if they've been in the organization or the team for a while, I like to get a sense of how long did it take them to get promoted into that position. So you see how is growth achievable here? Because there are a lot of teams where that doesn't happen and people get stuck in their roles. And that is a warning sign to me in terms of like thinking about what are the next steps in this position. And also how badly does the employer need you? Right? Or is this an addition to the team, or is it a replacement to the team? Has the job opening been there for a while? So these are all important data points for you to get a sense of, especially when we think about framing this ask at the end of the interview. So pay attention. Interviewing is a two-way street. Pay attention to some of these signs, which can be very important. So let's think about, so we understand maybe some of the mental roadblocks, but we know that we owe it to ourselves to ask for more. Now we have to get a sense of the data so that we know what we're asking for. So what is our market value? What are some things about the employer or this opportunity that we should be aware of so that we have a target in mind? Now let's say we have that, we're there. How do we present this? Before I can answer how we present this, I want to talk about positioning, which I think makes or breaks negotiations. People don't pay attention to this enough. They think that, I'm justified in asking for more, or I deserve more, or I'm really scared to ask for more. Whatever that may be, whatever the presentation of your ask, it has a huge, huge impact on the results. So let's look at this. So if I were to kind of take a very simplified view of the different ways you can ask, we can just look at this sort of matrix, right? The I win, you lose, I win, you win, I lose, you lose, I lose, you win. And I think you know what I'm going to say. If we're going to position this the right way, we really need to focus on the win-win quadrant for this to work. So what does that look like? I know it may make sense to be in the win-win quadrant, but it's sometimes the way we choose to word our asks can put us in the other quadrant, and it can really negatively affect the outcome. So let me show you an example. So let me show you an example of the I lose, you win, right? This is the I lose, you win. Let's say I want to ask for more resources. So the I lose, you win looks like, I guess I can make this project work with this limited budget. Sorry to bother you with my question. So I'm losing because I'm not getting the resources or the funding that I need to make it successful. The other party, I'll just say, is winning because they don't have to do anything. Just they get to keep status quo. And so it's not beneficial to me. How about the I win, you lose? I need more money. Otherwise, this project will be very difficult for me. So when you look at I win, you lose positioning, it's very much I driven. Like, I need this. I deserve this. I should have this for me to look successful, for my thing to be good, for my job to look good. And it just discounts the other person entirely. They don't understand how this serves them. How about the I lose, you lose? If you don't give me more money, I will find another company that will. So this is like the ultimatum, right? I don't recommend this at all. And I know some of you are like, that's so extreme, I would never do it, but this happens all the time. These negotiations can get quite emotional quickly if you're not prepared. This happens a lot. And then you have the erosion of trust, parties don't want to work together, and it's just a very dysfunctional situation. So what do we want to be in? We want to be in the win-win quadrant. And what does that look like in this example? The I win, you win. With additional resources and staff, our team can achieve 200% year-over-year revenue growth for our company's high priority project. It would be really exciting to achieve this together, right? All of a sudden, it's like, how can we align together? How can we work on this together? Even though it's you who's going to get more money and resources, but you are positioning it as a great advantage for everyone who's in your circle or who's working with you. And that is compelling. That makes it a really straightforward case for the other party to back to understand why they're backing, to understand that it's not just about your career, it's about the company's success as well. And it's always helpful to back it up with the right data. And I'll show you some specific scripts that show how to do that. But this is how you have a productive conversation. But they have to understand where your intentions are and your purpose for this to happen. So please remember, when you go into a negotiation, think about how am I going to present this as so the other party thinks that I am thinking holistically about this. It's not just about myself. And there are many ways to do it, even though I know many of you are thinking, wait, but this is about my salary. How does this serve them? But there is a way to put that together, and I'll show you some examples. So we want to think about framing it so we're not triggering bias or negative emotions. You do that with showcasing the right approach and attitude, that you're here for the right reasons. You want to stay here. You want to contribute to the team. You want to do good work. In order to do that, how can we set ourselves up for success to do that? And I have to say this. When you present an ask, you need to do it succinctly and clearly in a compelling way, but you really have one chance to make that ask in that time. Do not, if they make a decision or if they're thinking about it and they make a decision, you can't like go back to them the next week and say, well, can we go back to that? Or how about this instead? Or how about that instead? That drawing it out starts creating ill will, and then they start to think that you are there for the wrong reasons. So really, you do have one chance to make this right. So that's why it's important to think about how you're going to position it. Questions? Okay, let's get to the good stuff. Let's look at how do we string this all together. So let's look at some negotiation scripting and the framework that I use and I teach, which is a collaborative outcomes approach, which I think is highly effective for almost every negotiation scenario. Before you think about scripting, and I'll talk about what I mean by scripting and why it's significant. If I'm going into a negotiation or planning a negotiation, I need to be very clear what my target is. I talked a little bit about this information gathering. Yes, so you have this idea of your market value assessment, you have some data points there, but you still have to make sense of that, right? You may have this data, but you know that it will look different in terms of how you package that depending on the opportunity you're evaluating. For example, if you're talking to a startup, that's going to look very different than if you're talking to a huge company or a governmental agency. And you need to think about how you're going to package your market value assessment for those different parties. So let's see. Where I start in terms of clarifying that is I look at what's in front of me, right? What is it that I'm trying to evaluate here? So that could be a current offer, a current opportunity. I can look at the money, the salary. I can look at the job title. I can look at the responsibilities associated with that. I can look at the resources that are available. I can look at the terms, the specific terms of the contract. And then what I do is I think about how do I want to improve it? Okay. So maybe for me, it's a complete compensation thing. Based on my market value assessment, I feel like I'm being underpaid and I need to increase this by 20%. Or maybe it's really around my job title and responsibilities. Based on my expertise, I really do think I'm ready for that promotion and I should have more responsibility. Or maybe it's just, I want access to more career development resources. I want to take Nita's negotiation course at Stanford. I want to invest in my growth. Or maybe it's just terms. Maybe you're completely happy with how things are set up, but you just want access to senior leadership. You want to share updates directly in that strategic meeting they have every week. So identify what it is you want to achieve. I bolded one of these, if you notice. I bolded promotion to the next level. The reason I bolded that, because you need to think about your negotiation holistically, not just piecemeal. So it's like, oh, I want to get 2 extra vacation days. I want to work from home. I know work from home it's a joke right now. Don't worry. I want to, I want to make 10% more, but you have to think of it as the package and present it as such. And the reason why I love this whole fixating or thinking about promotion and thinking about the next level is that a lot of these other factors are related to that, right? So if you do get promoted, you will get more money, you'll get access to more resources, you have more leverage in terms of your terms. So think a little bit just bigger picture when you start thinking about what it is you want to achieve. So let's say you have a target. Now let's get in the room or the Zoom with the person and ask for what it is you want. So this is why I script these and I recommend it. This is a really difficult conversation to wing, okay? Very few of us will do it correctly because it's important. We have one chance to make the right impression. It is naturally emotional. After all, it's about your worth and how people recognize and value you. And you don't want that emotion to mess up your delivery. It also, I'm not saying that by doing it, you'll be successful. I do think you need to do it in order to be successful, but it also sets the stage for future negotiations and outcomes. So the way you handle this negotiation can really pave the way for other growth opportunities down the line. So please, I know it may seem silly to you or just like too much effort, but even jotting down some bullet points on paper on your computer can really help you structure your thoughts for such a high impact conversation. Now, remember, we told ourselves we're going to stay in this quadrant, the I win, you win. And the way we do that is, I think a great way is to leverage what I call the collaborative outcomes approach, which is what I teach at Stanford. So let's start with thinking about how we're going to set up this conversation, how we're going to introduce the topic to our decision maker by establishing the right background, presenting the data, asking, and then inviting feedback. So setting up the conversation. When I think about setting up the conversation, I know many of you are like, how do we start this, right? Do we just say, hey, Mr. Manager, I want to negotiate, which is a little awkward. Or we can find a way to think about a more just natural way of getting into this. So maybe it's, I always enjoy talking to you about our career goals. You provide such valuable guidance and I wanted your advice on my role. Or I appreciate you making the time for this meeting. I'm here because I would like to discuss the terms of my offer. So I don't want to surprise anyone, you know, I don't want to shock anyone. I want to put them in the right headspace for this conversation. I think you'll also notice by these example scripts that they express reassurance that this is going to be a positive conversation, that you're going in there with like having the best intentions. You're also confident. So that puts the other person in a better spot to have this conversation and for it to be productive. What you don't want to do, and I have to say this because I see this all the time, whether you email somebody or tell them at the end of a meeting, I wanted to talk to you about something. Or do you have time later? I have something important I wanted to discuss. And then the other person's like, yeah. How many of you love it when someone does this to you? Hey, I need to talk to you about something important. Do you have time at 4 p.m.? And it's like 2 p.m. and you're just like, what's going on? What are they going to tell me at 4 p.m.? And you're like thinking of the worst case scenarios and all your mind just goes into overdrive, right? Please save the other party this, right? Don't do this to them. And then they're like, sure, is everything okay? And you're like, awkward. It's not the best way to set up any conversation. So be clear. This is just a good thing to do in general. Because what happens, these are 3 slides in on this, and I know it may seem like I'm over communicating the point, but because this is a situation where many of you may feel uncomfortable and you know you have to do it, if the other party perceives a change in tone, where they're seeing that you're nervous or you're apologetic or you're emotional, they're distracted by that. They're completely distracted by your delivery. And that's a huge red flag. They're no longer listening to the content of your ask. They're looking at you and they're seeing that you don't even believe what you're asking. So if for whatever you can control here, whether it means practicing with other people or just kind of running through this a few times so you can make a clear ask, please try. It's worth it. so that this conversation goes as smoothly as possible. And there's a quote: when stakes are high, opinions vary, and emotions run strong, we're often at our worst. And this is probably why I think most people are afraid of this conversation, and why when you hear those negotiation horror stories, it's usually strongly correlated with how it was delivered. And I don't want you to make the same mistake. So let's go to the other part of the script, right? Step 2, let's say you introduce this. Now you have to start the conversation. So I like to ease them in by establishing background. As you know, I have greatly enjoyed being a part of this team for the past 3 years and managing this project. Or I am so excited to be presented with this opportunity to work with this team and leverage my experience in XYZ. Step 3, so present the relevant data. The data points could be, in particular, I'm proud of achieving, or in the case of a new job offer, I actually have another offer from company B, another notable player in this field. Step 4, present your ask. So if you're already at a company, maybe it looks like, based on my successful performance, I would like to explore the possibility of moving into a more senior role so I can achieve greater impact for the team. Or if it's a new job opportunity, company B is offering me X dollars more. As you know, I really value the opportunity to work with a world-class team here and to help make these products #1 in the market. If you can match company B, I will gladly accept. So let's string this all together. And before you do that, you need to ask yourself, when you're presenting your ask, what do you really want at the end of the day? And also think about, what are you hoping to achieve for others? And that comes out clearly in your ask. So putting this all together, this is a final script example. Setting it up. Thank you for serving as such an inspiring manager and mentor this past year. I would love your guidance as I think about next steps. Background. It has been such a meaningful experience leading Product Z for the past 2 years here at Company X. Data. As you know, since I took over managing this product, we have increased performance by 150%, secured 40 new customers, and increased revenue by 200%. Let me just say here, presenting data, if you can quantify your impact or your results, it's the strongest way to present data. Finally, your ask. Based on this performance and the positive feedback from key stakeholders, I wanted to explore the possibility of moving into a senior product manager role so I can continue to leverage Product Z's success and grow other critical areas of our business. And so as you see, this seems, you're obviously advocating for something, but it doesn't pitch you against the other person. I think it comes off as very collaborative. It brings them in, it helps them understand your way of thinking and connects the dots for them. And it's something that they can back. They can understand why they're backing, because you presented clear data and the ask is clear. They see what's in it for them. But you don't stop here. You present this not as a demand, not as you better do this for me kind of ultimatum way. You present this and then you pause. Invite feedback. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. And you listen and you validate. You're processing, but you're not reacting. Why are we doing this? We want the other person to also feel invested in this decision. We want them to feel invested in the outcome. And that will make you successful, not just for this negotiation, but also for the relationship and for other potential opportunities. So this is playing the long game, right? We're not just trying to I'm going to win this negotiation, because it doesn't end there. I'll guarantee that it doesn't end there. And it's really important to set the right precedent in this. Questions?
There's a few in the chat. So One question was that I heard advice for salary negotiation as to include a review of the compensation package after 6 months on the job or a year. Do you have thoughts on that kind of review right after you've gotten a job at an interval?
Sorry, so it was the question about doing that, like checking in and
Just
kind
do
of.
you have thoughts on that? Yeah.
So I'll talk a little bit about that. I like that a lot, actually, because in the case where you do present an ask, you try to negotiate, and there's a few outcomes, right? You can get it, you can get more than what you started at, or they can say, sorry, this is what we can do. This is all we have, and it ends there. Or it opens up the possibility, and this is what I do advocate for my students to do, especially if they receive a no or sorry, we can't right now. And even with that, you still want to join them, and that's perfectly fine, right? At the end of the day, you have to agree to the terms, and it has to be okay with you. I'm just saying you should try to ask if at all possible. So let's say you agree to that. I like this approach of like asking, and I teach this when I talk about effective communication, about having regular sync ups so that you can sort of you can achieve accelerated growth. Because usually for most companies, it's like this yearly review plan. But even with that, you want to sync up with these decision makers on a regular basis so they can assess your progress, and if there's any way of realigning things or changing things based on performance. I would definitely welcome that opportunity. And if you can put that structure in place with your manager, that's perfect, because I'm a big fan of that happening. So let me finish a few more slides and I'll get to some more of these questions. But good questions. So ultimately, this comes down to trust. This is a huge exercise in trust, if you think about it, right? When you think of anyone asking you anything, or you asking someone something, people want to help you if they can trust you, okay? And what happens sometimes, especially when the other party doesn't know you too well yet, in the cases of a new job offer, there's no history there. So if your ask comes across as too much me. So for example, I've worked with students where they're like, I'm going to tell them that I live in San Francisco and the rent is really high and I need to make more money. And I told them that's not going to work. Sorry. Yes, I know the rent is high in San Francisco, but that is not the best way to structure this ask, because it's very much me. However, if they perhaps said, you know what, I think I can add this value to the team and I can help our products grow this much, and I think my experience justifies a higher pay range, that's more impactful, that's more compelling. Because once that you lose that trust, whether it's because you botched the negotiation or something happens, it breeds resentment, poor performance, lack of loyalty, paranoia, all of the things. So it doesn't even matter if you end up getting what it is you wanted. If you weren't able to preserve the relationship for the long term, chances are you're not going to have a very successful future in that situation. So be very mindful of this when you present your ask. It's not to say you shouldn't present your ask. You should definitely do it, but do it in a way that really speaks to the other person. I also want to touch upon this in the last few minutes here, when to ask. And I know I'm kind of introducing some of these topics very quickly for the purposes of this workshop, but I do have some resources that you can read and refer to if you want to learn more. But I know that this is a huge one, especially given the uncertainties of this past year. I mean, like, think about it, right? We started last year, 2020. It feels like it never ended because we could not predict what happened. It was just a lot of stuff. And it really, I think the uncertainty makes you feel powerless in a lot of these situations. And a lot of us think, well, there's no way I should be asking. But I'm here to tell you, because I do actively work with industry partners. I do have a lot of professional students, and I'm here to reassure you of something. Negotiations are happening all the time, even in the market conditions that we've been experiencing. They have been happening all the time. They do happen all the time, and they're absolutely happening remotely. A lot of negotiations, even before the pandemic, were happening over the phone and with people not in the same room. So do not let that discourage you. I think the thing that's different now that we need to make sure we have is the data piece. So effective documentation, making sure you can back up what it is that you're producing, and your results and your experience is going to be incredibly compelling when you're making an ask remotely. And the other thing is to really look at this and think about all the opportunities that are at play, because a lot of things are radically shifting, dramatically so, to adjust, whether it's positions, responsibilities, industries, all of that. And think of where are the opportunities of leveraging your skills, leveraging your strengths, and leveraging your experience. So I actually think that it's perfectly fine, in case any of you were saying, oh, I'll do this, but I'm going to do it in 2022. No, you came here, you're going to do it this year. Finally, a lot of my examples were around money. A lot of my examples are around compensation. I think those are incredibly important factors for us when we think about our employment and the careers we want to build, yes. But there are other factors that are also impactful in terms of our growth and success, especially if you don't end up getting what you want in terms of compensation, but it's still the right company and organization for you. Let's think about other things. So things that I like to think about in terms of negotiating terms, it's related to that question about looking at performance reviews 6 months in. I love that. I think if you can get any flexibility around performance parameters, whether changing the performance review schedule, looking at bonus structures differently based on results. Like, if I'm able to ship this out in 2 months, is this something that we can reevaluate? I love putting things like that in place if possible with your manager. The other thing I like advocating for are strategic resources and support. So this means access to leadership, so I can broadcast my results to strategic people, or getting more strategic projects, or access to conferences, or just things that can really accelerate my career based on the connections that I make. Also, career development. So my students, especially my professional students, they get their classes comped by their companies and organizations, which is wonderful and they can prove it as a win-win, right? Investing in them makes them better people to work with. So if you can do tuition assistance, professional development, coaching, an investment in yourself is helpful for your company, but it's also very helpful for you. So it's not all money. It is all money, but it's not all money. So think about these areas too, so you can sort of think about how you want to navigate the years ahead.
Yeah, Nita, just to ask a question to follow up with that, do you have any advice for negotiating like disability accommodations and things in that vein?
Absolutely. And specifically, what's your question about?
That was just one of the questions we received in the RSVP. So just like in general disability accommodations, whether that be telework or other sorts of like disability adjustments.
Absolutely. So I think when we're thinking about identifying our target, making a prioritized list of what is important to you and why is it important, and then putting that in the ask. I definitely think, especially if it's important to your work, it should definitely be a part of your ask. And I'm finding that most employers are very understanding about that, especially now. I don't know if there's a specific question in there other than yes, you should ask around that. So I know that we had this hour workshop, and I teach this for a quarter, and I couldn't like put everything in a 1 hour workshop on negotiation. I think we touched upon a lot of helpful areas. So I've also been documenting, speaking of documentation, I have a newsletter for my students, and I'm happy to, and it's a free newsletter if you want to subscribe, where I go into detail about a lot of these tips and tricks. So if you want to learn more, like for example, not giving the first number, how do you get out of that? How do I negotiate competing job offers? How do I find the decision maker? I have this ask, but who do I present it to? Do I present it to the recruiter? Do I present it to the hiring manager? What can happen if I present it to the wrong party? So there's a wealth of information there, and I publish them like 1 to 2 times a month on average, is kind of like the best tips and tricks that I think kind of answer everyone's questions on the subject. So I recommend that if you want to learn more, or just have that something in your inbox to regularly remind you that you should be advocating for more at the very least. All right. Well, thank you so much for this time. And I'm here to answer any more questions that you may have.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. This was a really great, I know, crash course on all of these different tactics. So we really appreciate it. People, if you guys have questions in the audience, feel free to either put it in chat or speak up. There's also a few from the RSVP that I can also read from. If we don't have any right now, I might jump on those.
I had a quick question. So suppose when you're negotiating and like you have like a friend or something that's working in that company and you know, and they've told you their like salary, basically, you know their total compensation package. Like, how do you bring that up when you're negotiating? Like, right, like, because you, in some sense, you know, some upper bound or something, right? Like, I mean, obviously there's the base salary that you're given, and that's often lower than what you could actually get at the end.
Right. Yeah, when I do present data points, I try, if at all possible, not to make it personal. And what I mean by that, I don't try to like name names, or especially if they're at the company. But they are data points, right? And if you feel like you're getting an offer that's lower than a very valid data point, what I would do is make a case as to why you should be in, that higher range, right? Like, and it could be, you don't have to specifically say, oh, so-and-so told me they're making this, but you can say, that there's, I know that the range for this is in this space, and I've kind of seen offers in this for this range based on my experience and the work that I've done and the work that I'm looking forward to contributing here. I really think that makes a lot more sense for me. What are your thoughts? So I would, again, like keep it very much about the case that you're building, but press on it and see what they say.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Nita. Thank you so much for giving this talk. This has been, I just really enjoyed listening to you speak on this, and the words that you were using in the examples, I found it really helpful. For context, so I am a graduate student right now. I'm pursuing my PhD, and I'm a couple years out from receiving it. Actually, I work directly with Annika, who is hosting this event. I was wondering, with something like an advanced degree, like a PhD, it's kind of a interesting paradox, because you're going to come out of it having, X many internships or co-ops, and those are going to tally up to years of experience. Right. But at the end of the day, you're still not having 5 years of work experience per se, but you do have the PhD. I'm just curious how you would equate that into your kind of data mining. Like, would you equate the PhD as being 5 years of work experience, or would you weigh it more heavily, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. No doubt, coming out of a PhD program, you have expertise in some field, in some domain. And when I talk about like emphasizing the strongest points in your market value assessment, it's really emphasizing, like, I think, like how substitutable you are, and the work that you've done, and how that can really positively benefit the company that you're joining. But to the point, and I'm glad you bring this up, because people do this too. I know this because I worked in industry, and some people think, well, you have not worked in industry yet, or you have not worked at companies yet, and so you're just an academic, or that doesn't really that's not a transferable skill. And what I would do is, based on the things that you have done, whether it's in lab or internships or organizations that including this organization that you're a part of, like, what are the transferable skills that you're like, no, this makes me a really good, like, I will be an excellent performer at your company, right? So sometimes they think that academics can't translate that, and it takes them time to ramp up in an industry organization or an industry setup, which I don't think is the case at all. But because a lot of people who come out of school can't effectively communicate that well, or they just believe, oh, you're right, I haven't worked in industry, you're right, it's going to be difficult for me. And it's just simply not true. It's simply not true. So I think to go into that with a lot of confidence, saying, this is my skill set, this is my area of expertise, And I see in this role, I'm going to be responsible for this, doing this. Thankfully, I've had years organizing this, doing this, managing this, using the same verbs that they use. And it's not going to be difficult for you. I just don't let people tell you or make you think it will. So I think it goes back to kind of scripting how you're going to frame it.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Sorry, my partner is in the background making really loud noises with the bag. Yes, I think that does answer the question. I think there's kind of this inherent stress in knowing, again, there's like this dichotomy with having a PhD where on the one hand, yes, you are an expert and that's wonderful. But on the other hand, a lot of the time, some of the things we hear is that because you are such a niche expert, sometimes that doesn't come across as being generally applicable to a wide range of skill sets, or somebody might not want to hire you at a higher pay rate because maybe that job doesn't necessarily require all of your skills as an advanced, someone holding an advanced degree. So like I said, I'm still a couple years out from this, and I personally do have internship experience when I'm graduating. So I know that there is some confidence to fall back on that. It hasn't just been straight school. There's also been industry applications. But yeah, I think it's some of that, just hearing from friends of ours who are getting their PhDs and going out into the job industry, how it can almost turn employers off knowing that you have this advanced degree because you might be so hyper specialized.
Sure.
So I think your earlier point does still address that, though, just emphasizing the transferable skills, which might not necessarily, I was actually talking about this with a friend of mine the other day, like what we're learning from this degree program isn't just the research, isn't just that expertise knowledge. There's a lot more skills that we're also learning. So yeah, I think the earlier point did address that, but that's mostly what I'm getting at with this question.
It's a great question. I think that some people will take advantage of what you don't know and your insecurity. And that's why I think it's really, I'm not saying your insecurity, I mean just the insecurity of like changing into, moving on to the next chapter. So here's a few things. The market value assessment that I talked about, it's not just an exercise. I really want you to believe it too. Like I really want you're going to come up with some sort of number. And as uncomfortable as that may make you, you're like, this is too high. Are you sure? I want you to believe it. Go in believing it, right? And the fact that most jobs, you're never going to meet 100% of the requirements. And that's true for people in industry. That's just how it is. And we know that women, we discount ourselves from that. Like we kind of talk ourselves out of it. So that's working against us. And it's really important to be aware of the fact that we may be doing that to ourselves. So believe your market value number, but also believe that you have the skills. And if you don't have the skills yet or the know-how yet, you'll quickly acquire it. You're smart, capable, accomplished women. There's no doubt you will. So that's why I think going into that conversation will set with that tone and with that confidence, it will set you apart from a lot of people who, they move from academics to industry and they're not able to communicate that as effectively.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the whole talk. It's been really great.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I'll throw out a question. So on my team, and I suspect this is probably the same at other organizations, like your team has a pot of money, right, that they're allowed to distribute for salaries that year. How do you deal with negotiating when more money for you means less money for other people, and sort of the inherent like justifying paying you more when it then negatively impacts other people?
Yeah, I think in general, you're right. I mean, it's a finite resource, money. And what I try to do is I try to take out, and I think you probably saw that from my scripting and my recommendations. This is not a personal thing, right? And it's not necessarily like a zero-sum game either in terms of how I'm framing this, because the way that you presented it, it's like more money for me, less money for you. And that's just simply not how we're thinking about this, right? It's about whether it's more money for me. I don't think it's any of your business how that impacts other people. That's really the organization and the company and the industry. And for you to take that on personally, that's a lot. So you should probably step out of that and think, oh my goodness, I feel guilty for taking more because that's hurting other people. I know, and I bring this up because this is actually a really relevant point. I've had people talk themselves out of negotiating because their company went through layoffs, for example, or restructuring or reorgs. And they're like, oh, there's no way I should ask for more, right? Like my friends just lost their job. And somehow they kind of connected themselves to that situation where really those are independent decisions. They really are. So if you're going to get more money, you should get more money. And it's an independent decision from somebody else getting more money. What should be funded ultimately are things of value. And we value your work and what your contributions are, or the projects that are probably high priority should get valued and should be recognized and get funded. And that's where we should keep the case about the value that's being created. And so therefore it doesn't get personal for me. So when I feel like I'm getting more, I feel like the people that are adding the more value and are helping the organization succeed, those are the things that should be funded. And so I guess, I don't know if that answers your question, but I really don't see it as a me versus other people.
Yes, the answer is just the reframing it correctly in your head. Yeah, I think part of it too is I'm like a first level line supervisor, so I sort of feel like, oh man, if I'm getting more money, the people that like report to me, then there's like less money left for them. So I recognize that you shouldn't think about it that way, but it's definitely hard not to.
Yeah, I mean, like if you're truly at a place that, I mean, the ideal situation is that if you are able, if you're well resourced and growing and everything is good, then it's a win. It should affect everyone in a positive way in an ideal situation, right? By taking less and everyone taking less, it really doesn't serve anyone at the end. So I think that thinking about the big picture is helpful to me. But I think at the end of the day, we need to get out of our head so much when it comes to negotiation. Speaking of negotiation, we're so good at negotiating against ourselves. Let's be honest. Like we're very good at talking ourselves out of things that are good for us, and we need to stop that. So I love that you have this, especially this organization, like to hold each other accountable is really important. And that's why I was just talking about my newsletter, because I think even every 2 weeks to get a reminder in your inbox about how you should be advocating for more, it's just an important reminder. So we don't waste our mental energy doing things that don't serve us.
Thanks.
It is easy to negotiate against yourself. Absolutely.
So one of the questions, oh, Amy, do you want to go? You can go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question about negotiating to be on a specific project. It's something that I wanted to talk to my manager about in the next week. Do you have any advice for doing that? Is it going to be the same as the tips you gave us for negotiating a salary, or are there things that are specific to negotiating for a project?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the collaborative outcomes approach, where I talked about setting up background, data, and then presenting your ask, you can really customize that for any request that you're about to make. So yeah, moving to a new title, moving to a new project, working on with a new team, kind of thinking about like, how do I present this so the other person understands my motivation, which is to contribute to this project, to leverage my expertise, to leverage my background, so we can all ultimately be successful. So I would definitely leverage that same script in that situation.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions we got in the RSVP forum was kind of from an international student perspective. How do you negotiate with your employer if they're the ones who's also providing you with a work visa? So like kind of when there's unfortunate leverage on both sides,
Yeah.
like how do you navigate that?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. Sometimes, unfortunately, your hands could be tied in that because they have a little bit more power in that situation, and they realize that you have limited options. If you do have options, or you do have compelling data, by all means use it. Options meaning you have competitive offers. That's really compelling, right? Our options could be like you just have information on the salary ranges, and you understand that, and you can make a case for more based on the information that you have. So it is worth asking. It is absolutely worth asking, and in some cases you could be very successful, or you can get more than what they originally offered. But your best case there is to, when you do get in there, is to put a process in place with your team, with your manager, so that you can have more regular check-ins. so that they can assess your performance more regularly. And hopefully, if there was any money that you left on the table, you can fix that if they're able to kind of assess you once you're there. So I would still recommend trying, but if you can't get it in immediately, try once you're there. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think you answered most of the other ones that were in here, just kind of along the way. So,
Great.
yeah.
Well, I wish you all the best. You can, I hope that you reach out at some point, and if you have any negotiation success stories, I'd love to hear. But I'm cheering you all on. You're an incredible group of women and allies, and it's just wonderful to be with people like you doing such great, important work. And I wish you all the best, and definitely stay in touch. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'd love to hear updates from you.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time, and I'm sure we've all learned a ton. I know I did. And I dropped your newsletter in the chat, so hopefully people can.
Thank you. Yeah. Wonderful. Best of luck, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.